बताउनु भएको हो। उहाँले सामाजिक लोकतन्त्रमा हुने प्रत्येक विकासका गतिविधिमा जनताको भूमिका निर्णायक हुने समेत बताउनुभयो। प्रस्तुत छ नेत्री सुकीले प्रजातान्त्रिक समाजवादको भविष्य विषयक अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय सम्मेलनलाई गर्नुभएको सम्बोधनको पूर्ण विवरण।
I have to say that even the members of my party, when they were campaigning for the elections, were not quite as complimentary. So I should take them all back to campaign for me in 2015. To go on now to social democracy. I noticed that although I was given the title of relevance of social democracy, some have referred to our proceedings today as a discussion of the future of social democracy. I have to confess that I prefer the latter. I would like to concentrate more on the future of social democracy because, of course, relevance also comes into it. To put it in the simplest way, social democracy assumes that the state is an instrument for social progress, that the government, in other words, has a responsibility to build up a society that is good and healthy. But I think in this day and age, we'll have to look again at basics. What exactly do we mean by democracy? What do we mean by government? The foundation stone of democracy is respect for the people. And to me, respect for the people means not just recognizing their rights, but also their responsibilities. It does not mean respect if you simply think of people's rights. To think of them as wholly developed human beings, you have to think of their responsibilities as well. And this is particularly important in societies which are emerging from authoritarianism. Nepal, Burma, and Chile share a history of authoritarian governments which suppress the rights of the peoples for many decades. As we emerge from the state where the government is in full control of everything, we have to decide what exactly the role of the government is, albeit a democratic one. We are seeing this practically in my country. In 2010, there were elections for the first time in more than 20 years. In about exactly 20 years, because a lot of the previous elections were in 1990, where I think, as it has been mentioned, my party won overwhelmingly, but we were never allowed to even call the Constituent Assembly into session. But in 2010, this was considered the first step towards emerging from military dictatorship. Our people had got used to decades when the government decided everything. Everything was decided for them. It is not just that the people had no rights, they had no responsibilities either. So during the years when we were under military dictatorship, I made a point of always reminding our people that yes, we had rights, but we had responsibilities too. And this is something of which we must never lose sight. And as we developed, or trying to develop, towards a democratic society, I have had to remind those who want to see Burma as a successful democracy that democracy is not just a way of government, it's not just a political idea, it's a culture. And building up a democratic culture is difficult. It is not something that we can achieve overnight. I have mentioned that one of the dangers of an emerging democracy is that development may be considered by some to be more important, that in the name of development, certain democratic values may be overlooked. I would like to define development very simply as an enhancement of the human spirit. This is not an ideal. This, to me, is a very practical recipe for healthy progress. If we are to progress in a healthy way, the spirit of our people must be enhanced. Why do we want to get rid of poverty? Because poverty hampers the development of the human spirit. It humiliates and it stunts. When we wish to achieve genuine development, we should consider whether or not this development will enhance the human spirit or whether it will stunt it and diminish it. In my country, at one time, it has been mentioned repeatedly, Burma was a shining example for Asia. But over the years of military dictatorship, our country became poorer. And sadly, the spirit of our people became dim. Our people lost faith in themselves and lost faith in our ability to make our way forward in the world. This was because for many decades our people were made to feel that they were not capable of carving out their own destiny, that their fate should be placed in the hands of those who rule them. And yet, of course, those who were ruling us were exactly the same as we were. They had emerged from our country, from our society. They had been born into the same values, into the same ideas as we had been born. But because they had managed to carve out a career for themselves that gave them the ascendancy, they began to think that only they alone were capable of deciding how our country should develop. This is the idea that we have been fighting against, without violence, because we do not believe that violence enhances the human spirit. It takes away from what will lead to healthy progress. For many decades in Burma, we have had armed struggles. We are a country of many ethnic nationalities. In order to build a strong and united nation out of these differences, we have to understand the basic needs of all humanity, not just the basic needs of one group, of one ethnic racial group, or of one particular dominant group. We have to consider the needs of all our peoples, and all our people must be given equal respect and equal responsibilities. Equity is at the foundation of all true good relationships. I have said repeatedly that you cannot be friends with those who are not your equals. You can be masters, you can be disciples, you can be followers, you can be colleagues, you can be occasional acquaintances. But to be friends, there has to be a fundamental foundation of equality. Unless we can achieve a system in our country where all feel that they are on the basis of equality, we will not be able to forge unity out of diversity. And social democracy is about inclusiveness. It is about society, and society embraces all political parties, all religions, all races, all different ways of thinking. And increasingly, we have to consider where does society end and government begins. Government is a part of society. And I think increasingly this has been recognized by the fact that these days CSOs, civil society organizations, play a very, very important role in the politics of any democratic society. It is not the government alone that should make the decisions with regard to what is best for the future of a country. The people must be able to take part in this decision making, not just through periodic elections, but through the day-to-day involvement in the development of the country. Inclusiveness is one of the most important ingredients of genuine social democracy. A democracy which is run entirely by the government is, I think, a contradiction in terms. A democracy should be linked to the people on an everyday basis. In our country, we still have to cope with the idea of making our people understand what democratic government means. I said earlier that democracy is a culture, but even before we get there, we have to think about what democratic government means. Everybody understands that the three main pillars of a democratic government are the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. But I think, in practical terms, many people, when they think of government, they think only of the executive. That is because the executive has the kind of powers that the other pillars of government do not possess. We have this particular problem enhanced in our country because we have not had either a judiciary or a legislature for about 50 years until the elections of 2010. Then a legislature emerged and a kind of judiciary, not an independent one, because the present constitution places the judiciary firmly under the domination of the executive. And today we have to struggle with the idea that government is the executive alone. Because of the years of authoritarianism, our people still think of government in terms of the executive, in terms of the president, the ministers, and so on. But government means the legislature and the judiciary as well. The governance of a country is much broader than executive decisions. For this reason, we see social democracy today is as far more inclusive than it has been in the past. We need to expand the ideas of government. We need to expand government to be more inclusive, to embrace the aspirations of social groups, of civil society organizations. In this way, we will be able to achieve a balance between a government that governs and a government that nurtures. We would like a government that nurtures. Nurtures so that the people are increasingly able to take a more active part in the government of the country in a responsible way. It has been said that democracy is necessary because of the weaknesses of human beings, but possible because of their strengths. So we have to balance the strengths and weaknesses in finding the kind of social democracy that we think will work best for the future of our world. These days, we can no longer think in terms of nations. We have to think in terms of the whole world. The very fact that here we are in Nepal talking about Burma and about Chile and all the other countries in the world that have struggled to free themselves from authoritarian rule shows clearly that we cannot think of our own nations as isolated entities anymore. We are part of this globe, whether we like it or not. And we have to make sure that we play our rightful role in this world of ours. In my country, we have been trying to develop politically as well as socially and economically. I have said to the Prime Minister and many former Prime Ministers, I've met more former Prime Ministers in the last 24 hours than I ever did in my life. I am very envious of the fact that Nepal is ahead of us in political development. To be able to sit down to dinner with 7 former Prime Ministers is quite an event. I would like to be able to do that in Burma one day. It shows that democracy is vigorous in Nepal. It is healthy, it is alive. It has problems, but it is meeting those problems, facing them straight on and overcoming them, I believe. And I have great admiration for the Nepalese army, for its professionalism. I want the military in Burma to become truly professional. That is one of the necessary steps that must be taken before my country can emerge as a true social democracy. Not just in name, not just on the surface, but the kind of depth that will bring to our social democracy the confidence of the people, the belief of the people in themselves and in the country. Nepal is a shining example to the world. It's a small country which has had to cope with very, very large problems, but it has managed because I believe that in Nepal they have learned the one most important lesson of democratic politics. They have learned to accept the idea of negotiated compromise. Negotiated compromise is not a failure. There are those who think of compromise as weakness. In fact, on the contrary, it is strength. It shows the great strength of Nepal that they have been able to achieve negotiated compromises and are about to, I understand, achieve another one in the form of a constitution that will be acceptable to the majority of your people. We are trying to achieve a constitution that will be acceptable to the majority of our people. And I hope that those in our country who are not enthusiastic about genuine reform will be able to look to you and to learn from you that negotiated compromise is not only honorable, it is praiseworthy and it is practical. It is a practical step forward. I have been told that my time is almost up. And so I must bring this speech to a conclusion. I just want to repeat that I believe in democracy and I believe in non-violence. I believe in both because I believe in the ability of humanity to raise themselves from a state of hatred and ignorance to a state where they can be more generous and inclusive and where they can enhance the spirit as they go along. In the end, we humans are made up of more than just physical particles. There is a human spirit that brings life and light to us. And I believe and will work towards a situation where all of us can join together to keep this spirit strong and always progressing towards greater strength. Thank you.
nepalnews.com. News from Nepal as it happens.